January 8, 1908, the Ellensburg capital, Ellensburg, Washington. Lighthouse Keepers. Weird vigils of the men in the French service. Toil that breeds madness. The only wonder is that any of these lonely workers escape insanity. Pitiful plight of the isolated keeper at Foreign Finisterre. A French writer, telling of the life of the lighthouse keepers along the coast of Brittany, thinks it strange that any of them escape insanity. The system of relief that prevails in this country has no equivalent in the French service, and, with short intervals months apart, a French lighthouse keeper may spend 40 years of his life tending the lamps in one station with a single companion, and that station may be on a rock out in the Channel or the Bay of Biscay, which boats can approach only in fine weather. As a matter of fact, the men often do become insane, or at least develop monomania. Sometimes it takes the form of hatred of each other. In one case, at Taranec, one of two men was found, by a party who came off from the shore in response to signals, lying dead in his bed with a long, keen bladed knife through his heart. His companion's story was that he had committed suicide after a long period of melancholia. There was no proof to the contrary, but after examining the wound, the authorities doubted the truth of the story. On another occasion, where father and son tended an isolated beacon together, the young man was seized with an attack of acute mania. When the time came to light up, he planted himself in front of the stairway to the lantern and refused to allow his father to ascend. The old man attacked his son and, finding he could subdue him in no other way, so that the lights on which so many lives depended might be kindled, strangled him to death. The next day, he signaled to the shore for help and gave himself up to the police, telling what he had done. Sickness and death are no strangers in the lighthouses. There is 99 times out of 100 no chance of medical aid, and the well man prescribes from the medicine chest for the sick one as best he can. He also does double duty until his partner recovers or relief comes. There are not infrequent cases when the survivor has to sew up his dead comrade in a hammock and launch his weighted body from the rocks into the sea. Then come long nights of lonely watching. In wintertime, the lamps must be tended and the clockwork kept going for 14 to 15 hours. The lantern is unheated except for the glow of the lamps up in its ceiling, and the government allows the watcher no chair lest he fall asleep. It is no wonder that weird fancies come to the men. They hear voices calling from the sea and see drowned men and women looking up at them from the breakers. One of their horrors is of the birds that beat against the windows of the lantern at night, attracted by the glare. Just as is the case with American lighthouses, the feathered armies that migrate at night beat against the walls and balconies of the beacons with their wings and dash against the panes of the lantern, sometimes breaking the glass with their beaks. As their eyes shine in the glare, they seem to express anger or bloodthirstiness to the men within. One of the most pitiful stories of lighthouse life is told of the keeper at Foreign Finisterre, who kept all alone a station on an isolated rock a couple of miles out from the shore, but so surf-beaten that only once a month or so was a boat sent out to it with supplies. The cabin in which the keeper made his home was on the shore opposite his lighthouse, and the recreation he most enjoyed was watching it through his telescope. He could see the people go in and out and the children playing in front of it. One day, he saw something fluttering from the door jamb. He was puzzled. Then it flashed on him that it was crepe and that someone had died in the house. Was it his mother, he wondered, or his wife, or one of his brothers? He counted the children later in the day, and they were all right. The wind blew, and the water raged. No boat could come near him, and he watched the crowd of sympathizing friends come and go. Then he saw the funeral. He recognized the curé at the head of the procession by his white surplice, and the altar boys walking beside him. Then came the coffin, carried by 6 men. As the mourners walked after it, he strained and strained his eyes, trying to identify each and thus determine the missing one, but in vain. All walked with bowed head. The women's faces were buried in their handkerchiefs. The men held their hats before theirs. He could make out nothing characteristic. The men who 8 days later risked their lives to row out to him and break the news of his wife's death found him a physical and mental wreck from sleepless anxiety, but he kept the light burning faithfully all the time. The French lighthouse keepers receive from 700 to 950 francs a year, $140 to $190. When they are worn out, they retire on a pension of $6.80 a month. Chicago Record Herald. April 16, 1896, Aurora Daily Express, Aurora, Illinois. A lighthouse without a light. The most extraordinary of all lighthouses is to be found on Arnish Rock, Stornoway Bay, a rock which is separated from the island of Lewis by a channel over 500 feet wide. It is in the Hebrides, Scotland. On this rock, a conical beacon is erected, and on its summit a lantern is fixed, from which, night after night, shines a light which is seen by the fishermen far and wide. Yet there is no burning lamp in the lantern, and no attendant ever goes to it, for the simple reason that there is no lamp to attend to, no wick to train, and no oil well to replenish. The way in which this peculiar lighthouse is illuminated is this. On the island of Lewis, 500 feet or so away, is a lighthouse, and from a window in the tower a stream of light is projected on a mirror in the lantern on the summit of Arnish Rock. These rays are reflected to an arrangement of prisms, and by their action are converged to a focus outside the lantern, from which they diverge in the necessary direction. The consequence is that, to all intents and purposes, a lighthouse exists, which has neither lamp nor lighthouse keeper, and yet which gives as serviceable a light, taking into account the requirements of this locality, as if an elaborate and costly lighthouse with lamps, service room, bedroom, living room, storeroom, oil room, water tanks, and all other accessories were erected on the summit of the rock. Strand Magazine. July 14, 1912, Spartanburg Herald, Spartanburg, South Carolina. Women tend lighthouses. Along the coasts and rivers of the United States, there are 27 heroic women in the Bureau of Lighthouses, Department of Commerce and Labor, as keepers, assistant keepers, laborers in charge, or laborers at the light stations which warn vessels of the presence of dangerous rocks, reefs, and shoals, which in times past have wrecked many a good ship. All but 3 of these women are either married or widowed, there being 10 who succeed their husbands, 2 their mothers, and 1 her father, as keepers of the great beacons. 3 help their husbands with the hazardous work, and a few lend helping hands to other relatives. 2 are widows of lighthouse inspectors. April 5, 1919, the Woodville Republican, Woodville, Mississippi. Had lived out of the world. John Harris, aged 75 years, has retired recently as keeper of the Winter Island Lighthouse after a service of 47 years, says a Salem, Mass. Dispatch. Harris had never seen a moving picture show, ridden in an automobile, seen a city electrically lighted after dark, or eaten in a night restaurant. His duties at the lighthouse made it necessary for him to be there at night, and during the 47 years, he was never outside the beacon after dark. During the entire 47 years, he was never absent from his post, except during 5 days, and on those days, he was always back in the lighthouse before sunset. Now he is on the pension roll and has moved with Mrs. Harris into Salem. They are going to spend the remainder of their days getting acquainted with the modern world.